Well, my name is Serf Doesborgh. I'm a student here in Maastricht, a master's student at the Science and Technology Studies. And I'm also the coordinator of the Zeitgeist movement in Limburg. And that's why we are organizing this event right now. Because what we usually do is we organize a Z-Day, which is basically an informational event all around the world once a year. And for this time, we are organizing informational events to create visions for the future, to talk about what could be a more sustainable future and also how to get there. A little bit about the Z-Day, as we see here is a little chart. It's being organized all around the world. However, the disclaimer here, this is from 2014. I think previous updates have not been updated that far. The main event right now is in Australia, and we, with the Dutch chapter, are organizing it here right now in Maastricht. And that's why we're all here. So let's start a little bit with what the Zeitgeist movement is. In just a short sentence, it is a sustainability movement that is essentially focused on economic theory and how we can move the current system towards a more sustainable one. And let's get into that right now, what that is about. And because we have all kinds of problems in society today. If we look at the problems here, there's inequality, there's climate change, there's crime, and also unemployment. These are all types of problems. And I want to spark your imagination a little bit. And what goes through your mind when I go through these problems? What would cause these problems, do you think? If I say poverty, if I say climate change. Some things that might Thank you. that might pop up might be that we are not making good policies or something else, like that there is scarcity. I want to ask for a show of hands if some of these problems are being contributed by, let's say, policy making. We're having bad policies and therefore these problems exist. Some people? It is scarcity that we have, absolute scarcity. There's just not enough to go around and therefore we have the poverty and the inequality. Is that something that's not the case? Okay. We have corrupt organizations that are actually contributing to these problems. Yes. It's a flaw of human nature. We're basically competitive by nature and therefore we see the inequality, the poverty and the crime. A little bit. And there is a new world order called the Illuminati, which is controlling the whole world. Okay, a few. Okay. Well, let's get started with the basic system in itself. If we take a big perspective, everything in this current system is based on scarcity. And that's started off with a little bit earlier with Thomas Malthus and also a little bit Darwin. Because Malthus, the Malthusian premise is basically that there's simply not enough to go around for the population that we have. And with that, later on, came Darwin with the idea of survival of the fittest. Everybody has to compete with the other people in order to get a piece of this scarcity. That's basically been put together and is still also, while it is debunked sometimes, still the edifice of the socio-economic system today. And that leads to all kinds of other aspects that I will want to talk about what the market system comprises. Of course, the first thing is consumption. And we're all consumers. We have the employer who gets a profit and an employee who gets a loan and we spend back into the system. It's a little bit like a gas pedal on the car. The faster this goes, GDP grows, we have more jobs, economic growth, and that is something good for the economy. But if this even goes down or even stagnates, well, we have a problem. We have unemployment, economic degrowth, and often politicians are held accountable for that as well. So what is built in right away from the center is infinite growth. We need to keep consuming, otherwise we have a problem. And of course, that leads to all kinds of problems, resource depletion, overfishing, and those kinds of aspects. To keep consumption going, we also have something built in, which is obsolescence. Of course, when we make products, they are not always lasting forever. That's basically intrinsic obsolescence. Technology is breaking down over time. That's something that we can have. But we have also planned obsolescence, basically a chip within a computer, or actually the most famous example is the light bulb. Some aspects are capable of lasting a very long time, but we just make them not last that long because then we can keep consuming again. Postponed obsolescence is another one. We have the newest technologies available, but let's first make a 2.0 version, a 3.0 version, so that we just keep consuming and consuming. And if that is not enough, well, then we have style obsolescence, which basically is advertisements drilling into people that we have to keep consuming, keep up with the latest fashion trends or the newest iPhones or something like that, just to keep this going. Of course, a lot of e-waste is an example, but a lot of other waste pollution is there as well. And then there's this interesting notion of property. Of course, property makes a lot of sense. Everybody needs to have their stuff. But does it make sense when we take this into account regardless of its use? Does it really make sense for everybody to have one car or one of everything if it is not being used? Because we have a lot of parking spots and these are doing nothing at all. So maybe it is something also to reconsider, and something that is maybe better is access, but we'll get to that later. Of course, another aspect is intellectual property, something that is also, well, stifling creativity and also productivity, because why not work together to make something better? And then there is labor for income. Everybody has to contribute to this society one way or another, and structurally, if you don't have an income, you don't participate in this society, you might as well die on the street somewhere because you don't serve a purpose, structurally. Well, unfortunately, good for us that we have welfare systems and all kinds of systems in place, but structurally, on the economic level, this is the basic premise for that. And that leads again back to even more scarcity. Scarcity and imbalance of this system, and also to a lot of poverty. So scarcity is the basis of this economy, but it also keeps this in place. This system needs scarcity in order to sustain itself, and problems like pollution also come with it a lot of profit. Let's say if there's water scarcity, we can sell bottled water. If there's air pollution, well, we can have bottled air. Seems like a joke, but it's actually a thing in China right now. So keep this in mind. And I think Mahatma Gandhi said this best: poverty is the worst form of violence, and it's killing a lot of people on a structural level. Also, inequality is a really interesting point. This was a study that was done by people in the US, and they asked people, what would you like to be, what would inequality be like? What would the most optimum way of inequality be like? And they said something like this. So this is not communism or anything, it's just some people earn a little bit more and the people a little bit less. But overall, it's evenly distributed. Then they asked the people, what do you think that it actually is, this inequality? And they said this. It's probably something like this. And what it actually is this. So we barely even see the bottom. It's only one dot on this slide. And that's the inequality that we have today. Of course, on a moral level, this can be very wrong. But also on just a biological level and a structural societal level, this is something that is very bad. This is a study, really interesting, you should look this up if you have the time. The Spirit Level from Richard Wilkinson. They compiled, this is not their own study, but they compiled a lot of other studies and put them together in one or different graphs. This is the summary. And it basically says that health and social problems are worse in more unequal countries. Up there we have the UK, doing not so good. And up down here we have Denmark, we have Sweden, Norway, Japan is there. And it looks at life expectancy, but also homicides, trust within societies, and even the most disputed aspect is social mobility. In more equal countries, it's easier to get up. So not this inequality is motivating people to go up the ladder. This is something very interesting, I think, to look at. So there we have it. We have the market economy with consumption, obsolescence, property, competition built in, labor for income, and scarcity and imbalance. And when we look back at this chart, what we all acclaim to that these were causing the problems, Yes, they're causing some of these problems. But the root cause of these problems, these are merely symptoms. And that is what I want to convey to you right now. Because the human nature gets pinged by this competition, by the property that's out there. Policy making, when we have infinite growth to just sustain sustainability, is also really hard to do. Of course, there is inbuilt scarcity as well. And that is also creating all kinds of problems. The conclusion of this is that it is the socio-economic system itself which is at the root of these problems. And then I would like to continue on a different train of thought. What would be the alternative? What could be something different? And then we have, let's say that we're on a planet right now, just the planet that we have right now, only with the nature and those aspects, and we start over. What would we adhere to? What would we use? And there's only one constraint to us, and there is constraints, and that's the natural law of the planet. I mean, I can dispute gravity, but I cannot just walk up this wall right now, however I want to. Also, we are systematic beings that are in this system, meaning that we need oxygen and we are connected to the environment. So these are the restrictions that we have, the amount of resources as well. So what is the first step of this type of economy? Well, let's start with the economy in itself, which is, I think, a really good example of what economy used to be. The basic definition is the management of a household to increase efficiency. Well, our economy right now is not really efficient in that way. So let's stick with the most basic premise of that. We start off with preservation, not consumption. And what we want is to have a steady state economy, to be in balance with nature, and as it is called, have dynamic equilibrium. Basically that everything we use needs to be also regrown over time, and that has to be in balance, because if we run out of resources, we have a problem. So manage this as best as possible. Optimum design, not obsolescence. Make stuff to last as long as possible. And if they do eventually break down, recycle them. Or when it comes to PCs and all types of technology, design them that they can be easily updated. Why throw away an entire thing if only one chip is needed to be replaced? And then we have this access notion. Well, we have an example here already, which is OV bikes, but there are many more examples with technology these days as well. Again, like said with the property, why have one of everything? Basically, we could go into a library to access all kinds of stuff and return it whenever it is needed. And that saves a lot of resources in itself as well. And we can provide way more access if this is done with our understanding of science and technology today. And of course, collaboration. We are working together instead of fighting each other. Of course, competition is nice within corporations that want to ping the best interest and be creative. Also sports, of course. But the basis for societal collaboration, well, that's something different. Why have 20 different phone companies when we can actually make them work together to build the best one possible? And then have a variety in that, or even make your own designs, if that is even possible with, let's say, 3D printing later on. And then there's mechanization instead of labor. We should maybe organize our society that we can automate as much as possible. An example here, and maybe some people that have been in Utrecht or other Albert Heijn to go's, we can already chip at self-service desks, and this is one beginning that is there. This is an example of the Kiva systems in the Amazon warehouse. This is a fully automated workspace where these people are not working there that much anymore. Mechanization is something I'll get into a little bit later. With all these aspects, we now have the basis for abundance and equity, also way better for social health and sustainability. Another term that we can put on this to make it a little bit more to the literature and also the post-capitalist ideas of which we're going to talk about this day is post-scarcity. That we no longer need to have this scarcity given our scientific and technological understanding today. So the problems that we have today, they don't need to exist anymore. And I'm not saying that capitalism in itself or the market system in itself is really bad. It was sufficient and good a while back, but it is no longer needed anymore. We can move away from this. And that is also why it is way easier, because it's pinging our best human nature. Policy making in this regard, if needed, is also way easier. Scarcity is not that much there, and organizations of that being corrupt, well, that's also not that much there. A world order, well, I would say there is more order instead of a new world order. And if people are still skeptical about the human nature aspect, I want to show you this short clip.
In a society which is predicated on competition and really very often the ruthless exploitation of one human being by another, the profiteering of other people's problems, and very often the creation of problems for the purpose of profiteering, the ruling ideology will very often justify that behavior by appeals to some fundamental and unalterable human nature. So the myth in our society is that people are competitive by nature, and that they're individualistic, and that they're selfish. The reality is quite the opposite. We have certain human needs. The only way that you can talk about human nature concretely is by recognizing that there's certain human needs. We have a human need for companionship and for close contact, to be loved, to be attached to be accepted, to be seen, to be received for who we are. If those needs are met, we develop into people who are compassionate and cooperative and who have empathy for other people. So the opposite that we often see in our society is in fact the distortion of human nature, precisely because so few people have their needs met. So yes, you can talk about a human nature, but only in the sense of basic human needs that lead to certain traits if they are met, and a different set of traits if they're denied.
And then the question, of course, becomes, how do we go about these needs? Well, we can supply for the most basic needs. This is the pyramid of Maslow. This has been slightly updated. I've seen when you go up on the internet, this is not the chart that goes up. It's actually, I think the younger generation puts it a little bit more like this. But I think we have taken care of this as well. But this is the most basic needs that we can move forward. So the post-scarcity society that I'm talking about is not that we have everything and infinite wants and needs and that they are being met. It is an aim, a train of thought to work towards, that we can move higher and higher up this ladder so that we can provide for most people. And this is the main difference. This is how, also the Zeitgeist movement wants to portray these ideas. And if you want to learn some more about how the market economy is here and how it works and how it actually doesn't work, or also this alternative aspects, I suggest looking into the books. They're back there also if you want to read into them. The Zeitgeist movement defined, and also the new human rights movement, which is just released. But let's move a little bit further and look at, because it all seems very nice, but how to get from one to the other is the million-dollar question, right? And I think also with new post-capitalist literature that's out there, also all new kinds of ideas, the start could be made here with the labor for income system up to mechanization. And that's also what I'm looking into in my master's degree for automation. Let's have this quote first. 47% of jobs will disappear in the next 25 years according to an Oxford study. Well, in history, there have been many proclamations that a lot of jobs will disappear in the future. And now the question is this the same old story? Or is this time different? Just a show of hands. Who thinks this is the same old story? Who thinks this time is different? All right. Let's have a short look at what some of the ideas. It starts off with agriculture. From 1930s to 1980s, the US farm labor force declined by about 2/3, and the machine labor ratio increased nearly tenfold. And that is what we also have seen lately with agriculture that has not returned that much. Then we have manufacturing. In 2003, Alliance Capital did a study of the world's 20 largest economies ranging at that time, ranging from 1995 to 2002, finding that 31 million jobs were lost, while production actually rose by 30%. This contradiction is something to look out for if you want to take a look at technological unemployment, which is the official term. That production increases, but actually jobs are getting lost. This is where efficiency actually comes in, technology comes in. So where have all these jobs been going? Well, to the service sector. Industry is going down, agriculture is going down, and the services are going up. And what are we seeing with later studies in this service sector? A study also done by a person in Utrecht. Job polarization is something that's happening right now. And basically it is targeting the most routine jobs, because that's the most easiest to automate. And middle wages, middle class work is declining. And there is an increase in lower jobs and also in higher jobs right now. But this is also reformed to the service sector. So that's what we are seeing right now. Another chart, we're going to bombard you a little bit with charts here. Here we have the profits of corporations, which is going up all the way. This little slump is from the recession, so that's something to keep in mind. And actually, employment is going down. And when we take a shorter look, or a closer look, at this same chart of employment, it's a little bit stretched up right now, what we see is recessions, which are the gray lines. You can't see them that much, but they're over there, 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 and there. And what happens every time there is a recession, jobs are lost, and over time the economy retracts and jobs get back. But what we see is that the slope of this coming back is declining. So there it's up and it gets smaller, smaller, and smaller, which means that jobs are getting back, but it's taking them way longer to get back, and the economy to adapt to new jobs is also taking longer. First it was 5 years, now it's 10 years, and it takes longer and longer to get there. Then an argument that often comes up as well is, well, new jobs are being created. That might be true, but how many new jobs are being created? If we look up here, these are charted on the amounts of jobs that are people doing in the US. This is a US chart. 3 million in driver, in retail. And if we want to look at the first new occupations that have actually occurred, we need to scroll all the way down, computer software and engineers, which is 33. So up on that, those are still the jobs that are being done right now, are not new occupations that have been there. And this is a little bit a glance into the future, a perspective. So never ever believe somebody that is talking about somebody way in the future, because we cannot predict the future. But just to give you a short glance, these are the US motor vehicle industries, amounts of people working there. This is Google driverless cars, amounts of people working there. Is there a spot somewhere there? I can't see it, but it's really small. Of course, when this is taking off, this is going to increase. No doubt about that. But not as much as this. We can increase it tenfold if it's a lot of countries, but it's not going to nearly enough be something like that. And this is a short trend that we're seeing with new companies that are getting in. Everybody's praising also Google and also the new types of companies that are coming into the Netherlands. And yes, they bring jobs. Well, compared to older jobs, we have Walmart, 2 million employees, and they're worth, well, 200 billion. Google, also similar to that, but is employing only 50,000. And then we have Uber, 1,500 people, and it's worth 50 billion. And of course, WhatsApp was sold in 2014 to Facebook, and it was only employing 55 people. And then the prime example is Instagram, which was sold for 1 billion. It's also a big chunk of the market shares. And they were only employing 13 people. So that is the new types of jobs and new occupations that are coming up. So I'm not going to say a definitive answer to this. Is it the same old story? But there is an inclination to saying that, yes, this type might be different. And the last point that I want to go back to is the market economy, as we discussed earlier, and is the basic premise of cost efficiency. And then I can ask you the following question. In an economic system where companies seek to limit their production cost, which is cost efficiency, in order to maximize their profits and remain competitive against each other among other producers, what structural incentive exists to keep human beings employed in the wake of an emerging technological condition where the majority of jobs can now be done more cheaply and more efficiently by machine automation? What incentive is there for companies to do that structurally? And the answer, of course, is that there is not such an incentive. Then, this is something that is being talked about in all kinds of literature, and it's called the post-work aspect, which might be a similar transition. And this, what I just said, is a little bit of a deterministic view. This is gonna happen. This technology is gonna take over. But what these people are saying, no, we can demand for it. It is something that we actually want, because in that time, we can actually move towards a post-work society, implementing a universal basic income. Some of you might have heard of this, and we'll talk about this a little bit more. A shorter work week, but then maintaining the income of the full week, of course, because otherwise there is no gain in that. And also diminishment of the work ethic. What is work? And is work really that important? That's going to be talked about also in Adrian's speech. And this is something really interesting to think about on how we go forward with these types of ideas. So the transition is mainly from labor to income to mechanization, from post-work and post-scarcity. Post-work and post-scarcities are the ideas that are coming up and are being talked about in literature more and more now. So if we want to have a discussion on that, that's going to be really interesting to look forward to. But the most interesting part and the most important part is also a value shift. We have to let loose of the market economy and the values right there and move towards something different. And just to summarize what the value is right now, basically, there are thousands and thousands of people out there leading lives of quiet, screaming desperation, where they work long, hard hours at jobs they hate to enable them to buy things they don't need, to impress people they don't like. Also used in Fight Club, the movie, but it resembles a little bit of what we are in right now. But how about something differently? In an economic system which is actually designed to take care of you and secure your well-being, without you having to submit to a private dictatorship on a daily basis, usually to a job that is either technically unnecessary or socially pointless, people will volunteer their time left and right. This is a value shift that is possible to occur. And this is something that we can move towards, as I discussed earlier. Of course, sorry, it should be this one. That's more important. And we can actually move up from food and water, because with a basic income, that can be considered a human right and to provide for everybody. But that's still money to get to some of the resources. Why not move on to provide the actual resources as well and move up the ladder for the human necessities and the human rights? That is something that I want to leave you with. And I would say that it is very important also in times like these to not be that negative and not to be really feared about all these ideas and that it's not working out, but actually move towards something different. Provide a vision and work together to find solutions to ideas, but of course remain critical. And that is what is captured in this quote best, I think. You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. I want to thank you very much for your attention, and we're going to Basically, moving towards a new system is a really difficult thing, but as I alluded to earlier, I think a way out is this idea of using mechanization, using a universal basic income, and to start at those aspects of a post-work society and see how we can move towards something like that. Well, if we look at the basic income itself, there has of course been a lot of experience has been done with this, and see if this is working or not in India and also in Dauphin, Canada, and also the Netherlands is now experimenting with some methods of this. That's more tangible aspects to see if this really works or not and see how this works out. With the technology replacing human labor, this is what is inching in society right now, but is as I said, also not deterministic. It's not gonna happen per se, but it's something we can also work towards with policies if this is something that is desired to be doing. And therefore, this is something that we see also in the, like I said, in the Albert Heijns, the self-scan kiosks, or things like sharing rides to provide more access. There are all types of technologies that are out there that are emerging, but little by little that has to be going, and therefore this vision needs to be explored a little bit. It's still not that concrete, I think, in your question, but therefore it starts off with the ideas, and therefore talking about this and moving it into something entrepreneurial, I would say. Automation in this current system is really bad because it's going to lead to a lot of inequalities, a lot of frustrations, people not having jobs. So this has to be combined, of course, with the demands that were being put out here. The universal basic income and the shorter work week. What happens at that moment in time, people can become more creative and find different ventures. And of course, if you go into a supermarket, and it's nice that there is a person right there and that we can talk to these people. But this person also rather wants to be at a nice event, socializing with other people, maybe doing something different as well. And I think the socializing aspect is not going to happen in a supermarket. It's going to happen also in different ideas that we create ourselves, which we have also the possibility to do, because now we are a little bit more free to do that. Now we don't have to be there. And well, to be honest, if I walk into the Albert Heijn, I just want something for food, and I just get out. And also the people that are working there, they are kind of acting like robots. Oh yeah, thank you, okay, next. So the social aspect is not that much there, but it's something really worth considering, of course, because the social aspect is very important. But that's our creativity up to that, to get new spaces, get new ideas, to merge people and to do all kinds of new aspects. If that answers your question. Okay, I mean, there's of course a whole problem with people or actually sending money over, because that's going to be distributed unevenly, because the structure of, well, of course, the capitalist system is still there that promotes the inequality, and the pressures of doing that is still there. Personally, I would say that we first have to figure this out, how this works for ourselves, and see what kind of post-work society we could imagine and could merge. And for me, the interesting aspect is that also these experiments that are being done in, let's say, the Netherlands, but also if it's going to be done on a national scale, the moment that it actually does work, then it will create a ripple effect to move towards different countries. And if that is happening, then we can, from there, in that abundance and in that creativity, actually help other people out even as well. But this helping out aspect is also something which is a really Western view. Of course, we need to mobilize people there to do similar aspects, and the development of these technologies, that is something that we, of course, could help with. But I think there's a lot of creativity and a lot of ideas, but also still the values of society there are very much also here, and that's something that still needs to change. It's the competitive aspect and not working together that is also prominent there because of the scarcity that I alluded to earlier. So I would say, for me personally, it's the ripple effect. If it works somewhere, even in a small city, even in a country, it ripples over to other aspects, because the moment it works and people see positive change, of course, they want that as well. Well, looking into the future is, of course, really hard, but if you look at the graph that we just showed, that more middle incomes are disappearing. Some government reports have really looked into this as well, and what they advocate is investing really a lot in education, to reschool a lot of people into new types of jobs, but also to make general skills more applicable to the job market, because what's going to happen is routine jobs are easiest to automate, and therefore the possibility when one of your tasks of your own jobs is being replaced, then you have to merge with that and find something new. So let's say, for example, for teachers, usually they have to check for grammar and plagiarism. This is now instantly done. This is a task that is being done now by automation, and people can therefore do either different things or move towards something else. So education is one aspect that is promoted. However, I think this is still a short-sighted aspect, because in the long term, if also because of the pressures of the cost efficiency that I alluded to earlier, there is this constant pressure of automation for the cost efficiency. So in order to deal with this inequality, that's why also the basic income comes in and the shorter work week, so that the people have still their basic human needs and therefore also do a lot more stuff. What has been shown with the examples in Dauphin, Canada, but also in India, is that entrepreneurial spirit was increased by 200% when they got a basic income. So people were not lazy in that regard. People, once they have the freedom to do something, they take more risk and they do more. In these experiments, it's not a panacea for everywhere. So that's why we have to check it for everywhere and see how it works in societal context. So the basic answer that government reports will tell you is education. I would say go a little bit further with the basic income and the shorter work week to fill up these jobs, because we're not going to re-educate a lot of people into low-wage work, because then they have to do a lot of different work also to compensate for that. Well, I would say the reason why we're here is also that. It's talking about these visions, getting the ideas across, that people in their hometown or in their family or somewhere else talk about these ideas and really criticize these ideas as well, because we can take this for granted and it's going to happen and it's good. Well, there's a lot of drawbacks and a lot of complications with implementing universal basic income. Adrian will allude to that a little bit later as well. But also that's why people need to be engaged with these ideas, and to implement this is again the political question, and I think that's the interesting part, maybe with the panel discussion later on, and also maybe Hans and Marlies that are going to allude a little bit to how practical this actually is and how this can actually be implemented, if at all. It's really a political question. How are you going to finance this? What I've heard from some people is that you start off with, let's say, 100 euros a month. Not going to replace anything, not doing anything. Of course, 100 euros is not enough. But then you start setting the basis also to diminish the work ethic of what it actually is. Try to promote some automation if that is somewhere possible. Because these things, they work together, right? The more automation there is, you want a shorter work week with that. But also if you want to implement the basic income, you might want to have some additional automation. So it's really finding out and structuring how you're going to finance this over time, or how you're going to implement automation. And that's a really complicated question, and that's something we actually together need to work at. I wouldn't have the answers for that right away, to be honest. And that's also why we are actually here. So it's a really good question and something we can pop in also in the panel discussion, I think, later on. I think time is over, right? Yep. Okay, thank you very much for all the questions. We're going to move on to the second speaker, and well, let's do that now, actually. Yes.